Welcome, everybody. I really appreciate you making the time to come join us for this webinar that we've titled Navigating the Student Communication Transformation. So I'll be the moderator here. So my name's Mike Bills. I'm the president here at Atlas RTX, and I have two of our very, very progressive clients, Nate Luce with the Owen Graduate School of Management at Vanderbilt, and Dan Gaines with the Cranner School of Management at Purdue. So Nate, how about you give yourself a more proper introduction?
Sure. Again, I'm Nate. I'm the executive director in the marketing communications department at Vanderbilt Owen Graduate School of Management. I've got a 10-person department that oversees the marketing and comms efforts for all of our programs. We have 6 degreed and some certificate programs on top of that. I've been at Vanderbilt for about 5 years. And then prior to that, I was actually in industry, serving in various capacities in IT consulting, financial services, and traditionally have a writing background. So happy to be here.
Thanks, Nate. Dan, can you do yourself the honor of a proper introduction?
Sure, thank you. I've been with Purdue University at the Cranner School of Management for the past 7 years. I've worked in higher education for 12 years. Prior experience was in sports, professional sports, Olympics, doing marketing there. But as far as the Cranner School, we have 6 specialized masters that are in resident options. We also have 4 online masters. We have a executive MBA, a weekend MBA, so hybrid programs as well. Also market our online certificate programs. So we've got a pretty full portfolio of options for prospective students.
Great. Well, and I guess I should say just a couple things besides being president here at Atlas. So prior to Atlas, I founded a higher ed software business that was an online advising and counseling platform specific for higher education. I've been a college trustee at Westminster College in Salt Lake City for the last 15 years, and I happen to do my doctoral dissertation on higher ed business models. So I'm both a somewhat of an insider and scholar of higher ed business, and which is one of the reasons why I'm so excited to have Nate and Dan here, because they're 2 very progressive marketers and have delivered tremendous results at their respective institutions. So I'm just going to start off with a question that one of the observations that I've made, being straddling business and academia, is the different ways that we go about doing business. And both Nate and Dan, you both have experience in industry. So I would be interested if you could talk about some of the key differences in marketing philosophies and tech and tactics from industry to higher ed, both for better and worse, and also how some of your industry experience may have informed what you're doing at your respective institutions. So Dan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so the transitioning to higher ed, the biggest difference that I've noticed is just the very long decision cycles that students take. And it's really, you have to develop trust with your customers, compared to when I work in industry, it was very transactional. We're asking these students to make tremendous investments of their time and money. And so you have to build trust with them, build rapport, and, that takes time. And obviously, they conduct their research and get a feel for you, but they're assessing fit when they're talking about making these kinds of, life changes and investments that they'll have to make.
How about you, Nate?
Yeah, I can see a little bit of that too from my experience. Coming from IT consulting, I think I was used to some slightly longer sales cycles, although it was more of a B2B play, so there are different considerations. I found in my somewhat limited experience, the biggest difference is sort of an organization's willingness to embrace marketing and sales as functional requirements for the business of higher education. And I think about it that way because that comes down to how you formulate your strategy, how you articulate that to people internally, and then get that buy-in that allows you to sort of, to your follow-up question, kind of invest in some of these technologies like digital assistants. And so I think higher ed's come a long way in the last 10 years in terms of embracing marketing and more of a sales philosophy. But I think it's still probably, generally speaking, more of like a, one-off, let's add some things here and there in terms of how do you actually put technology around what you're doing. So, for that reason, I kind of try to transfer some of the things I learned in industry here. I try to lead with, a sales-driven philosophy, not necessarily because everyone's on board with it, but because my leadership tends to be on board with it because they're aligned to those goals. And so, for that reason, and for the point of the sales cycle, we really do try to focus on exceptional customer service. That's a core tenet of our philosophy. And, technology like digital assistants, if you can articulate that philosophy internally of customer service, a digital assistant makes a lot of sense within that philosophy. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
No, but it's a great answer to that question because you actually said a few words, and one of them in particular a few times that I don't hear that often in higher education, and that is sales cycle, and customer service. So and we're among friends here, so it's easy to speak that way, but it's interesting. So is your leadership there at Vanderbilt, do they have a philosophy that is consistent with what you just said, sales cycle, customer service?
Yes. I mean, they probably will call it recruiting more than sales, which is fine. That's just a choice of parlance. We are a portfolio programs. I mean, it sounds similar to a lot of what Dan's dealing with too. And so I think when you have a portfolio, it can be a little easier to think about it that way because you're thinking about funnels for different programs. And so you kind of have to concentrate on that in order to reach your goals. So I do think there is something on board. There is this notion that, we are here to educate people and advance their careers and provide that fulfillment. And so sometimes people prefer to kind of approach it from that perspective, other than the customer looking for product, buy product, enjoy, tell other people kind of model. But yeah, I think by and large, if I can articulate it and then I can show how certain things will drive results, it tends to work. So I try to be as specific as possible with why we do what we do and why we buy what we buy.
Great. So, so you mentioned sales cycle, and Dan, you talked about that long decision cycle for a student. So, and I know at Purdue, you have a couple of online only programs. How does what's the decision timeframe difference between an online program and something that's going to be on campus?
Well, we found that the decision cycle for online programs is much shorter. They're not relocating families. They're not making tremendous life changes. They're more they're deeper in the funnel. A lot of times when they come to us, so they've already looked at rankings. They've already looked at some of the different options, and they're just trying to at that point just consider like what the type of classes that I'll take, what is the online experience like? Do they have support services? All those kinds of questions. Whereas, if someone who's coming to a campus is asking a lot of other questions that, we need to be well equipped for, and like, Nate was referring to, customer service, and, we have to be responsive at everything that we do, from like marketing to recruiting, the sales element, but also through admissions, just to be responsive to those changing cycles for students. So we have to be able to play the long game with the in-resident student, and then more of the short rapid. Once they're ready, we'd be ready and prepared to move them through the application process as quickly as possible. But I will say that the online student is also, while there's a shorter decision cycle when they really engage with us, there's actually a longer cycle where they're considering their options of not only do I between schools, but they're also considering, is an online degree right for me? Do I do a certificate? Do I do a full degree? Do I, the motivations behind that being like, are they getting it for a promotion or for skilling up or things like that? So, that's something we're continuing to, understand more and more is, like what does that cycle look like, depending on what their motivations are.
So what are the tools that you're using to stay engaged and nurture those prospects?
Yeah. So, COVID, really kind of accelerated our move into like online meeting space, connecting with students online in meetings and things like that. That's been a pivotal part, but the digital assistants that we have help tee those up and really help matriculate students through, answer key questions for students. It's in being timely, with responses is extremely important. A lot of these online students, in particular, they're like after hours. They're not in regular business hours. They're just at home online. We have to be able to respond quickly. We can't wait, 12 hours to get them a response on something. They're looking for pretty immediate, answers. So that's been one of the critical elements of the digital assistance in supporting our marketing and communications efforts to just keep students engaged, and keep them moving and get their questions answered. So they're in our application pipeline and not just toiling around in our inquiry pipeline.
And Nate, yours are all on campus full-time degree programs. So what's your strategies for staying engaged as students are making and nurturing them along?
So just as a point of clarification, our exec MBA and our MMHC are part-time, but they are on campus, with a bit of a hybrid element on the MMHC. But we do a lot of the same things that Dan is talking about. The website is just the most critical marketing tool that you can have at anywhere in the funnel. And a lot of that rests in its power to inform in a sort of concise, logical way. It's a burden and a privilege at a university to have a lot of offerings and a lot of things that you can show a prospective student, but it's also, how do you arrange that? How do you make sure that if someone who's coming back for the third time understands exactly where they're going, if they want to see what kind of courses they'll be taking, or when deposit deadlines are due. So to be able to have that website formatted in a way that's logical is important. And then to the point about, not everyone's going to be around at their desk all the time. A digital assistant is perfect for even just reminding people who've been there before to go back to the same page and be able to get to that spot very quickly, particularly if they are examining other formats. We've seen that a lot where prospective students who are either just weighing us versus another peer or weighing us versus an online or hybrid option, they'll probably have multiple tabs open and literally just sort of going down the list of things that are priorities for them and then doing a comparison shop. So just to be able to be part of that process in a logical way, I think a lot of research from different agencies has shown will just improve their perception of you in a meaningful way. And so I also think just in terms of, asking questions and getting answers, I think there's some questions that prospective students want to ask, but they might be a little nervous to ask that to someone who might be judging them for admissions down the road. They don't want to sound like they aren't informed or that they're not prepared. And a chatbot or a digital assistant can really help with that, just in terms of getting rid of that fear and having that question answered without having to wait for a response from somebody who might be asleep, or someone that might be asleep and might kind of wake up and make a determination about your fit just based on the kind of question, which obviously isn't what actually happens, but that perception's everything.
Nice. So over the years, I've seen like at the institution where I serve, what still seems to me a heavier reliance on older channels, email, phone, buying lists, and what's happened with the efficacy of those as And are there still populations where those still work as they did, but maybe perhaps other audiences where more modern technologies and channels are having an effect? So what are the channels that you guys are using, and what's working for whom?
Yeah, so I'd say, digital, well, to piggyback on what Nate said, website. I mean, that is critical, and not as, informational tool, but also a connector. We want to have students, we want to keep them moving through the pipeline. So digital advertising has been critical for us, trying to meet students where they're at online, and engage with them. We use things like lists, but that's more of a supplemental. You mentioned that as more of like a older generation. I mean, that I would say that's supplemental. That's not driving our marketing. But yeah, and I think that the key is to also have a really be well connected with your recruiting, your sales team, and that element, that human element is important, but having your communication systems that can work well with them and move and engage them and hand off to them, that's critical. So there's a lot of outbound things that we're doing to try to draw interest in, but it's critical, the automation that you have once you bring them in, that is becoming more and more important, especially as prospective students are just, again, they're seeking more immediate response, and want to move quickly. They don't want to have to wait and want their answers quickly.
Yeah, I agree. All those channels are in play for us too. I think a lot of higher ed dollars have poured into digital media buys over the past couple of years, particularly in the social channels. So I think there was actually a point of arbitrage maybe 2 or 3 years ago where that isn't there anymore. So if you are on social media advertising in particular, you have to be very careful about how you manage it and constantly look and change. A lot of platforms are always coming out with new ways to engage with a prospective audience, which I think is fascinating and interesting and worth pursuing. List buys sound old school, but a lot of people still take those tests, or a lot of people raise their hand as interest. And I know that, GMAT has expanded a bunch of GMAS has expanded a bunch of their offerings in ways that they haven't before. I wish they would expand to the executive assessment. They still haven't done that yet. If anyone on the call has, a line to Eric Chambers, please tell him I said hi and ask him to sell those lists. So those are things that you still have to do. And as far as like reception from people, I think all generations are okay with calls and emails. I haven't seen anything, just anecdotally or through other people's research or through our own experience to suggest otherwise. I think maybe folks that are slightly on the younger side might be more open to engaging with new technologies as they come about, but I don't necessarily think that precludes people that are from, seeking executive levels of education from trying those things out either. It might just be in smaller numbers from what we can tell through our more cutting edge channels.
Great. So a question just came in through the chat, which is one I was going to ask anyway. So I'm going to go ahead. So both of your institutions have global brands, and so you have a pretty good representation of international students. So do you work or communicate differently with domestic versus international students?
You can go first.
Go ahead, Nate.
Okay, you've just been taking it first for a while, so I feel like
we can pivot either way.
Okay. Yeah, there is a difference. And I think it also is contingent on program too, because some programs might have more of an international focus than others. So, from a domestic perspective, we tend to focus on, regions of interest, with a bit of a national element sprinkled in for some of our larger programs, like our full-time MBA program. From an international perspective, we do target particular markets. We tend to target Southeast Asia, South America, Central America, and Japan and Korea. And the messages that we have for them are very specific to those areas. You know, like on the admissions and recruiting side, there are people that are dedicated to those particular regions. And so the way they talk to prospective audiences is different, and we try to follow suit and be complementary to that. There's also different angles in terms of, you know, seeking sponsored students, how you work with that. There's a little more B2B language in there probably than you would expect from someone who's not being sponsored internationally. So yes, it is different in terms of the things you say and the channels you reach out to.
How about you, Dan?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like there's a variety of different channels. Like WhatsApp is very big in a lot of areas of the world. Of course, China with WeChat, Baidu, different. I mean, they have like entire different, you know, communication ways you communicate with them. I don't think I'm saying anything that everybody doesn't know, but you know, so there's a variety of specific channels that you want to really consider when you're targeting different areas of the country, or areas of the world. But it's also a little bit different conversation. I mean, we found that, you know, a lot of international students, they've already done a lot of research. They're more intentional about the application process and you know, things like the outcomes for international students. Like if I'm going to come to the US, to your school, like what's going to come, when am I going to be able to get a job? And you know, there's things like OPT. They're very concerned about that. If they can't land a job, like that's a critical component. You know, OPT extenders, things like that. You know, when we talk to domestic students, they're still doing a bit of their shopping. You know, they don't have their decision set always in place. Whereas I feel like the international students are just a little bit further in the funnel. We're already in their consideration set. They're just trying to find the nuances of the program compared to others. But again, you know, communications is absolutely critical for international students to be able to communicate with them 24/7. We've also found with some of our in-residence master's programs that parents are involved, and they're reaching out on behalf of their children to try to ask questions. And a lot of times they're speaking in their native language with our digital assistant, which it's great that we have like the translation function, because it talks directly to them. So they may not always be in English, because they're trying to create the path for their student and answer, you know, having a lot of questions. So they're very involved. You're talking about like they're moving people across their student across the world, their child. They're involved in the process. So it's great to have like a tool like the digital assistant that we have that you communicate directly with them.
And there was another related question that was speaking about some other types of students. And so the question was, does the message change for military or veteran students?
Yeah, it does. They have a whole very specific set of questions and qualifications that they have to go through. And so, yeah, I mean, it's enough and specific enough where it's better to have dedicated space on your website to talking about it. It's great to loop in current students who are veterans or active duty to talk about different options. That's important to that audience. You know, there's given the way that programs are set up, there's probably programs that are way more appropriate for veterans than other programs, just depending on the level of work experience required, age, things of that nature. So yeah, you've got to be able to speak to yellow ribbon eligibility. You've got to speak to, you know, how you can do a work-life balance if you are active duty. All that stuff is very important, and you need to have that on your website. And you need to be able to, if you have a digital assistant, that digital assistant has to be able to point people in the right direction or answer the right questions pretty quickly. You got to be able to find it.
Yeah, I would agree. Any sort of affinity group, you know, I mean, even your own alumni, you really got to treat them differently than you would like any student. Military, the population, any kind of population you can think of, you really need to think about like how you're messaging them, the ways that the channels you're using, and again, I mentioned trust at the outset, that if you're talking about one thing, and it's not resonating with the group, you're not building that trust. And so you have to segment your communication, really understand your audience, and develop the strategies and use the tools that you need to engage with that audience.
Great. Well, and there is a question. It's a little bit of a non sequitur, so I'll just address it quickly. And the question was, is this and so by this I assume we're talking about our platform, something that is used as a recruitment tool and then ends after acceptance, and does this software interact seamlessly with CRMs such as Radius, Slate, etc. And on the flip end, LMSs such as Blackboard and D2L. So so it is not something that that has to end after acceptance. So particularly at the undergraduate level, where students that have been accepted into your schools have likely been accepted into 5 or 6 others, by engaging with them in texting after the fact, it allows you to identify those students that are most interested in your institution, so you can focus them on the ones that are most likely to enroll at your school. And then you can also remain with them even after they've deposited, so that they don't melt over the summer. So anyway, that's just I don't mean to make that an advertisement, but I didn't want that question to remain unanswered. So let me get back to another a point that I find interesting with both of your schools. So you each have executive MBA. Dan, you guys have a online MBA. Correct me if I'm wrong. Do you have a part-time one as well?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then there are master's degrees that are designed for students coming straight out of undergrad. So in each one of these are different audiences as well. And they're at different ages and stages in their lives with different objectives. And so I'm curious about some of the differences in how you communicate with them. So Nate, how about we start with you?
Sure. So I would say for 1-year master's programs for folks that are coming basically straight out of undergrad or essentially straight out of undergrad, we find that connecting them to people who can discuss the experience in an organic way is important. And so we do a lot of that. There's a lot of opportunities for prospective students to check in with current students and ask questions that ask any variety of questions, whether it's just sort of, living in Nashville versus job opportunities, things like that. They also spend a lot of time Googling stuff. So you have to be able to find a way to get people who Google stuff to your website. And there's a bunch of stuff that I could unpack there that I won't for competitive advantage. But they respond to digital ads. They will answer texts. They will pick up phone calls, or if they don't, they'll listen to the voicemail. I was reading somewhere, I think essentially 60 to 70% of students in this group just expect an omni-channel response the second they raise their hand through an RFI or something else. So there's not many ways they won't want to communicate with you, but they do expect a very prompt response. And they also expect information on your website to be clean. I've seen a lot of research that suggests that, if they have problems finding out admissions specific criteria or curriculum information, that might just be the one thing that takes you off their consideration list. So, they're more than willing to engage with you in a lot of different ways, but the expectations are there that you provide the information they want in the ways that they want. I think that's extended up now to sort of that full-time MBA audience. I can see that too. People are just aged into that group now. So I see a lot of those same expectations. And so we try to provide that same kind of experience. And then, for some of the more senior groups of more experience, I mean, we talk a lot about outcomes. We're an outcome-driven organization, and we try to pride ourselves in that, and we focus a lot on that for those particular groups. So we will explain how people in a certain industry or function end up getting a promotion by attending our executive MBA program, and we'll map it out on a timeline, and we'll send that to them in a variety of ways. We have gated content on our website that if they give us their information, they're able to kind of understand where they might fit into business school and how that translates to success for them. So we tend to get a lot. We weren't sure when we started doing those sorts of things that we would get a response from that age group, but we found that it's resonated quite clearly. So those are the sorts of tactics that we try to get from one end to the other.
Cool. Dan, how about you?
Yeah, I'd say the messaging that Nate was talking about with regards to outcomes is critical, and but it's different for different groups. Like the master's student, in residence master's student, they're leaving a job, they're coming here and they're relaunching their careers. Whereas an online student or a hybrid student, they're maintaining their jobs, and they're looking, to skill up or, get a promotion, things like that. So the, master's student is looking for outcomes as far as what's the job they get out of the graduate school and how does that compare to where they're at. Whereas the, it's a little bit different for the, the hybrid or online student. They're just looking like, what are the skills I will get? What is the, what are the outcomes? They talk about promotion, things like that. What are they, involved? Is it help them get further up the ladder, so to speak? So, so that, like placement with the in-resident student, placement is important, but also like career service is important because they basically don't have work, and so you have to be able to communicate that well. Is like, what are the services that they'll have, and what is the track record of those services to get them launched in their career. So as far as like, we are seeing like a rise in students being more engaged, seeking more engaging content. So our older students, things like an RFI form, they'll give us that information. They may not engage with something like the chatbot or interactive tools that we have as much, but the younger generation, that's the wave of students that's coming, they are much more likely to want to engage in a conversation and get quick answers through like a chatbot or a interactive tool, much more. So to have that in place is like critical, because they don't want to hear from you in 24 hours. They want to hear, they want their answers right away. Not to say that the older generations, seasoned professionals don't want that. We're just noticing it's much more accelerated with the younger audience, who's composing most of our graduate programs.
Sure. The notion of business hours is probably a concept that that perhaps they haven't heard of. And so I just have one last question, and that is, so obviously COVID came in and was really disruptive, and I'm sure it accelerated things that you might have been thinking about before. Some were just emergency responses, but what are some of the lasting changes that you made in your communication strategies that came from COVID that you think are going to be positive and help you be more competitive in the future?
I can jump in real quick. I mentioned it earlier that we have to be able to provide convenient ways for students to engage with us. Just being responsive and proactive in communications. That was the key thing that COVID really drove, was proactive communications and timely. Making sure that we're ahead of the game versus reactive to situations. But providing those tools for students to engage with us. I mentioned online meeting scheduling platforms, things like we were so glad that we had the chatbot or digital assistant set up. We've had it for a couple of years, and it was highly optimized because we were seeing increased questions, and COVID was a topic. They wanted to be directed to the resources right away. So but yeah, that accelerated some of our other engaging platforms where we're trying to either automate or connect with a human, or both. And SMS with that, like with our chatbot, like I said, we tee up our communications with, our meetings with our recruiters through the chatbot, through our digital assistant, with SMS follow-ups. And we're seeing large numbers of people wanting to engage, after they've had a conversation on the digital assistant. They'll like, oh, I want to take this further and talk to a recruiter, or program specialist. And we see high conversions of those. They're highly motivated. They want their questions answered. They want to talk to someone, and they're highly converted to apps.
Great. Nate?
Yeah, similar. I mean, it drove a lot of urgency in ways that we weren't particularly used to before, and opened us up to some virtual things that we were starting to kind of do more dabbling in, but really kind of put that to the forefront. I think in terms of automation, Dan's note is important because things change so rapidly. When you have an automated system, it's much easier to make sure that all of your bases are covered. We, just as an example, and a lot of other schools did this as well, but we added a round to our full-time MBA application in spring 2020, knowing that there was probably going to be an influx of people that were interested in doing it that weren't before. And so, to be able to have systems in place to automate, to be able to use things like a digital assistant to sort of message that quickly is super important, because going through, every single page on a website to make sure that all of your information is there is accurate, that your email flow you put in place several months ago is still accurate. That takes a lot of extra work. So I think there's more of an impetus to automate than there has been before. I also think the other biggest takeaway was virtual events. We just had a lot of people going on the road, and we provided marketing support as we could behind that. And I think people were very impressed by what they saw in terms of interest in attending virtual events, whether it's for one program or several programs, or even for us and a few competitors. Being able to carry that momentum forward into an environment where people want to hit the road again and see people face to face and shake hands, I think that's going to be very important, because the results that we got from all of those was just astounding. It didn't matter the program, it didn't matter the demographic. Everyone responded to it. But in terms of being able to, what are registrations for virtual events versus the people actually show up, I mean, that might be a bit of a steeper number to digest in terms of, how many people actually, the attendance rate, but still, if the overall N is larger, then does it really matter? It's just a matter of sort of being able to maintain those changing expectations when things become a little more normal.
Cool. All right. So I do have one last question that came in from our attendees, and that is the data that's collected through the digital assistant or chatbot, is that influencing any of your marketing and affecting any areas of recruiting based on some of that conversational data?
Yeah, for us, it has been very informative for some of our communications. We have like some reports that's like a time series of what students are asking at, when they're engaging with a digital assistant at what time of year. We see the volume of those topics and themes. And so that has helped us really understand what are students looking for at certain times of year. And we have a dedicated in-residence bot and an online bot, because those conversations are different. And, it's the reports are very interesting. I talked about the accelerated time that we have with an online student. And so just the variances in the kind of the messaging that, to inform our recruiting efforts or to inform our outbound communications, that's that's been critical and something that we want to continue to leverage even further. It also, when we have responses that the digital assistant that's being directed to human, we see like, what are those common things that the digital assistant is not automated to understand. We start seeing some of those that pop up. I'll throw in an obvious example. COVID, when that happened, we started seeing heightened levels of that, but that kind of tells us what of those conversations, what are they asking? What are their concerns? And so then we can take that, go back to our communication plan and be like, this is real-time feedback that we're getting from students, conversations, they're telling us what they're concerned about. How do we respond to this?
Stan, Nate, anything from you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think Dan farther than we are in terms of incorporating some of these findings, but we do tend to use it to sort of inform content updates to our website. We try to figure out exactly what people are asking about. We use it to actually, improve the digital assistant over time, so that we're answering the right questions in a more seamless way. But I'd say the biggest impact that we're seeing right now is sort of the way that we frame our content on the website, because it's sort of validation that we know where people are going and to what degree. So it's also been great in terms of just sharing that data with other stakeholders that aren't in the marketing department, so they can understand, it's just an insight into a customer journey that not everyone gets all the time, especially if they don't have a digital assistant. So we're trying to offer that value as well as a department to our partners.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Nate, Dan. Thanks so much for joining me here, and everybody who attended. Thank you for making time. We really appreciate it. And anyway, enjoy the rest of your day.